What's up, all you beautiful people? Welcome back to another episode of The Strange Road. We got episode 54, Rediscovering Ohio's Ancient Earthworks, part 2 with our buddy Jeffery Wilson. I mean, this episode was so epic, we had to split it up into 2 episodes. Jeffrey just absolutely blew our minds, and if you guys really enjoy these episodes, please go get Jeffrey's books, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, the expanded editions, and there's several different variations, the paperback and the hardcover, different volumes. So be sure to go check those links out in the description. We appreciate Jeffrey so very much for the information he's bringing to the table. And I wanted to talk to you guys real quick about the second annual Frogman Festival, baby. It's March 2nd, 2024, coming right around the corner. And your boys, The Strange Road, will be out there helping out in the AV room again this year. We helped out a little bit last year, and our buddy Jeff Craig from Map and Black throws an amazing festival, so he invited us back again this year. And we also have a booth. We're going to be selling some merch, hanging out. If you guys want to come out and say hi, Bub will talk your ear off. There's no doubt about that. Bub will talk your ear off. Come and say hi. It'll be a good time. And you guys can find all that information at frogmanfestival.org. The event is at the Oasis Conference Center in Loveland, Ohio, not too far from us in Columbus. If you guys are in Central Ohio or the Cincinnati area, you got to get to this. And it's 9:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Tickets $17.50 for adults, pre-sale, and then $20 at the door. Kids 12 and under are free, so come hang out, guys. It's going to be great. The sponsors this year are Loveland Magazine, Small Town Monsters, Hollyhoo Art, and that's right, baby, The Strange Road. So go check all those guys out. This year, the speakers, unbelievable lineup of speakers. Jeff Craig did an amazing job getting some high-level talent at this year's festival. We have Sherry Brake, who's a paranormal investigator. Our buddy James Willis is back again for the second year. We had James on the show in 2023. He's an author and paranormal researcher, investigator. Surrey Angel, who has many talents and is into esoteric and metaphysical information. And then also Jeffery Wilson, what do you know? Author, researcher, and our good friend is going to be out there giving a talk on, I'm not real sure just yet, but I know it's going to be epic. You guys won't want to miss that. And we have Cameron Jones, who is a ufologist and paranormal researcher. And then we have Kristen Smith, Kevin Moore, who are writers and curators and authors. We have Courtney Block. She's an author, historian, and researcher. And our friend Ashley, who's Ashley Hill, Fortean investigator, is coming back again. So you guys won't want to miss it. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. It's going to be awesome. If you guys enjoy this, let us know in the comments. Without further ado, here's our buddy Jeffery Wilson filling you guys in a little bit about the UNESCO World Heritage Site status and also expanding on all of the new stuff that he's found with these maps and surveys and things that have been hidden to us. Our history has been hidden for so long, and Jeffrey he's exposing all of it. So we hope you guys enjoy this. Much love. Take care.
That brings us to the recently named UNESCO World Heritage Sites, right? Back in the end of September.
Big news.
The National Park Service, in cooperation with the Ohio History Connection, submitted a bid for seven of the sites here in Ohio to meet this UNESCO World Heritage criteria, and it was voted on, and it was awarded that UNESCO World Heritage status. For those that are of the conspiracy-minded, the UN does not own these sites. They contribute no money to these sites. They have no real oversight over these sites. The United States is not giving away their sovereignty over these sites. It is literally something akin to the AAA seal of approval. Where, United Nations has voted that it recognizes that these are important sites that culturally should be preserved for the entire world.
That's cool.
All right, and that's what that designation is.
Chaco Canyon's one.
Cahokia is one.
Cahokia.
The last mound site before these that was named was Poverty Point down in Louisiana. Now, there was a lot of sort of political shenanigans to overcome to achieve this. You want the whole story, the long story, or the short story?
We can go for, let's get into it.
Go for it.
Yeah, let's dive into it.
The UNESCO organization is their scientific organization, and they have member states around the world. In 1990 or 91, during the first Bush administration, Congress passed a law that said that the United States could not contribute any money to any international organization that accepted Palestine as a member state. And the following year, UNESCO admitted Palestine as a member state. And so it kicked in law in the United States that United States legally could not give any more funding, could not pay their dues to UNESCO.
Okay.
And so that situation is still in place today until this past June. That law was in effect all through the Obama administration. And then when Trump was elected, one of the very first actions that the Trump administration did was to withdraw the United States from the UNESCO treaty altogether. Not even a member anymore. And so it was during the Obama administration. The Obama administration had gone to UNESCO and said, look, this law is in place. We can't give you any cash. You can't pay the dues, but we'll give you all the technical expertise and supplies and whatever we can do to help UNESCO. We just can't pay you the cash because the law says we can't pay you the cash. And that's when Poverty Point was granted UNESCO World Heritage status, first site that the United States has been granted since the law kicked in around 1991. So after Poverty Point, that was the last year of the Obama administration. When Trump took over and withdrew the United States, that kind of kicked in the death knell for this whole, Hopewell Sites bid for UNESCO World Heritage status. Until the Biden administration came in. And the Biden administration back in June reapplied to become a member of UNESCO and agreed to pay back the $600 million in back dues that the United States owed. And as a result of that, in July, UNESCO voted to readmit the United States as a member, and then at the end of September, they awarded this.
So we haven't paid a dime ever.
Wow.
Not since 91.
Oh, since 91.
But that covered Chaco, that covered Cahokia
those
back
were
then.
those were awarded in the 80s.
Okay.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So
okay.
Cahokia became a World Heritage Site in the 80s.
That's
Chaco
what I didn't
Canyon,
understand was if it was all from 91 or not from 91
so
on.
we had
but when-
nothing from 91 to Poverty Point, essentially.
Wow.
And so the process in the United States for submitting this kind of bid is every 20 years, the National Park Service is in charge of collecting possible nominations. They put together a list.
Wow.
And then that list goes to the State Department, and the State Department then can select one heritage site, like these earthwork sites, and one natural site, like the Grand Canyon is a World Heritage Site. Right? So each country can submit two per year.
Yeah, okay.
And so every year UNESCO gets together and they have this big meeting, and this year's meeting was held in Saudi Arabia.
Gotcha.
And they actually broadcast it live on YouTube. I watched it at like 5 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
The vote happened around 5:30. I actually watched the prior one, which was from Turkey. They nominated a bunch of wooden mosques built in the Middle Ages. And so the process is, countries around the world will, make a statement either in support of, or they'll ask for an amendment to the nomination, or, whatever it is. When it came to the United States one, not a single country gave a statement in support of or against, no amendments. They voted unanimously, no abstentions, no votes against, and it was done within like 3 minutes.
Wow.
It wasn't very long. The one interesting thing I saw was UNESCO gives a short PowerPoint presentation, 2 or 3 slides about the site before the vote. And they go through what are the criteria that makes the site worthy. They have a whole sort of administration regime of, what criteria this would fall under.
Right.
And so it meets, number 4, and so it meets criteria number 4 or whatever. The one warning that UNESCO gave was, you want to take a guess what they found problematic about this? They said the sites are absolutely worthy. No question about it. Sites are worthy. The warning they had, management. Mm-hmm. Management was in red.
Wow.
So,
not a good look for who?
Ohio History Connection and National Park Service.
Yeah, that's rough.
So,
wow.
So the sites are approved. They're UNESCO World Heritage sites, but obviously management is the problem. So
they really said that?
Management where?
Of these sites. Ohio History Connection
Which
manages
sites?
the UNESCO.
They didn't identify the specific. They just said management.
That's what I'm saying. You're saying Ohio History Connection. Which sites are we talking
the
about?
UNESCO World Heritage sites that we just
these
got.
Hopewell Culture
Which
sites.
ones?
All of them.
6.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
7, yeah.
So is it management at each one of them?
We don't know.
That's what I'm saying.
They didn't
But
identify
yeah,
it specifically.
I
I would imagine that in some report somewhere it details that out, but they didn't report that out.
So it's like, hey, we want to give you this, and we did, but we're still really concerned that you guys are going to basically screw
blowing
it up.
it.
Right. Well,
gonna blow
one of the
it.
things I do know is that UNESCO officials came and visited all these sites on a couple of different tours, and one of the main points of feedback was that they said we will never approve these sites as long as there's a golf course at the Newark Earthworks.
Yeah, that was a problem.
Now, is there a golf course at the Newark Earthworks today? Yes, the golf course is still there.
Yep.
So what changed? Well, $600 million from the United States probably, made a big difference.
Yeah.
But there's also the court cases has sort of been adjudicated that the Ohio History Connection has the legal authority to kick the golfers out, but there's still a court case pending as to how much they have to pay, right? So
Yeah, you can't just take the land,
and
basically.
Are they
actually
still
that court
operating?
case was supposed to start in October and has been delayed. So we don't know what the resolution of that is going to be or when it's going to be, but that has to go to a jury to decide what the value of the property is that needs to be awarded to the golfers to leave, because the court had already decided that yes, you can use eminent domain, Ohio History Connection, but you must pay fair market value. So the dispute is now, well, what is the fair market value of the priceless earthworks?
Wow.
Right? So that's where the issue is. And
So just to be clear for our listeners, the site we're talking about right now is the Octagon, which is a part of a much bigger earthwork called the Newark Earthworks.
Yes.
A really famous part of it is the circle, which is this giant, beautiful circle, but that's open to the public.
that's in a park, yes.
Yes. The part, another giant, huge part of this is this amazing lunar calendar
Yeah.
the Great Octagon,
Octagon connected to a big circle,
which
and
is
there is covered by a golf course.
That's just mind
an
blowing.
old country club that's been around for over 100 years has
Yes.
been leasing the land or bought the land.
They've been leasing it. The country club has been leasing it long before the property was turned over to the Ohio Historical Society back in the day. The way it went was there was a garden club in the city of Newark that decided to purchase it and preserve it. And they first allowed the golfers to create the golf course and golf there. And then they turned the property over eventually to the city of Newark. The city of Newark then turned the property over to the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio turned around and gave it to the private corporation of the Ohio Historical Society, now known as the Ohio History Connection. And so that's where the kind of chain of property went. But the golf course has been there throughout all of that, and they continue to maintain the property, and they continue to golf there. And
so right now they have not been kicked out. They're still operating the country club. Okay.
Yes.
Now, where do you see this going? You said it depends on the court cases, but I mean, eventually, is this country club going to have to shut down, and it's going to turn into like a gift shop and a museum?
I would imagine
and all
that
this
probably
UNESCO,
is the goal.
Yeah.
By the Ohio History Connection Corporation.
And it is a
I saw
corporation.
one interesting comment in one of the papers on one of the articles about this is that, we're trading a group of elites hitting a little white ball, managing the site, to another group of elites who are going to charge you money to get in to look at it. Like that's what we're doing here with this site.
Sadly.
But it will ostensibly be open to the public, although I would expect that they're going to start charging nominal World Heritage prices like what Stonehenge charges, $40 a ticket to get in to look at it. No, they're not telling everybody that that's what they're going to do, but obviously they're going to have to pay millions of dollars to get the golfers out of there.
Yes.
One of the complications in the court case, which was particularly interesting, was the court told both parties to go and get a property assessment done. And both parties went off and did that. Well, the Ohio History Connection went and got their property assessment, didn't like it, thought it was too high. So they found another property assessor to give them a lower number. But they didn't disclose that to the court or to the other party, the golfers. That actually is illegal under Ohio law. And so there's a penalty for that, which is spelled out in the law, which is that at the end of the jury trial to determine what the value of the property is, they can be assessed up to 10 times the amount of the value of the property as the penalty for trying to lie to the court over the amount of the value of the property.
Shut up.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Under eminent domain.
Wow.
And so, let's say like the golfers say they can't relocate for less than $20 million. The Ohio History Connection,
200 million?
the Ohio History Connection offered them $800,000. Now you're talking about like a major country club building that is like made out of stone. That's a historical structure built in like the 1930s, or whatever, and all the other improvements and everything else, and the value of the lease of the property,
There's a swimming pool,
which by the way, the Ohio History Connection went to the golfers back in the late 90s as they were going through their financial crisis and got them to re-up their lease for an additional 75 years.
Shut up.
So the lease doesn't run out
they
until
screwed
like
themselves.
the 2060s.
because they were broke.
So they screwed themselves.
And so they have to buy out the value of that entire lease. Now, what is that worth? It's in the millions, right? Well, that's what the golfers are arguing. Ohio History Connection is saying, no, it's not. It's only worth,
$800,000.
So obviously a jury is going to come down somewhere in between there, maybe. But then you have the penalty phase. Like let's say they come back and it's $10 million. What's 10 times 10? Are they going to pay $100 million? They don't have $100 million. They don't have $10 million. So I expect that at some point the Ohio History Connection is going to go with their, hat in hand to the Ohio State Legislature, and taxpayers are going to end up paying for this thing. That's where I think it's going to end up, which is practically criminal that we're going to be paying all this money so a private corporation can own this site. It should be a public thing. If Ohio taxpayer
This
money
is
ends up
ridiculous.
funding this whole thing, it should be open to
This is
the public
ridiculous.
for taxpayers paying all that money.
Free.
Yeah. But
We've
that's
already paid for it.
But
Yeah.
you better not be charging me parking lot fees, brother. Whoever is running the operation at Ohio History Connection, first of all, this is wrong. This is wrong. You're caught in.
well, it's one of these things. Nobody likes the fact that the golfers are golfing on the sacred site.
but they're the ones that
they upped it for
preserved it.
75 years.
They
Exactly.
preserved it.
What do you
the
mean you don't
octagon
like
would
it?
have been gone.
You can't sell out the rights and then say, "Oh, we don't like
see,
what's
the thing
happening here."
The thing is that this UNESCO
Like-
World Heritage bid came after
It
they'd
doesn't
already
matter.
upped it.
Their morals or their convictions weren't in question before when they had somebody willing to pay 75 years worth of a lease.
So what is more value to the Ohio History Connection Corporation? The
Well,
value
now-
of the lease from the golfers or the big brass ring for tourism money?
Oh, I
That's
think
what
that.
I think is going on
Yeah.
behind the scenes.
Oh,
Well,
I think that's
Ohio History
absolute
Connection.
idiot.
Now you understand why us kooky podcasters and weirdos are always talking about institutions like you.
But what have we- not just
because
them.
you always do shady shit.
Not just them. The Smithsonian did.
They all
We've
do
already
it.
discussed
And
the
it's
Smithsonian
sickening.
screwing up this whole.
And you guys are going to
process to
skate
begin
by
with.
this whole thing, Ohio History Connection. You're going to skate through this whole thing, and we're going to be stuck with the goddamn bill.
It's like the.
And that's just the way it works. And they're going to say, hey, suck
that's-
it up.
That's where I think it's going to go.
And people that actually
I'd be happy
visit
to be
these
wrong
places,
about it.
you're going to charge
hope you're
me,
wrong about it, but
'cause
you're
I'm
probably
gonna
not.
I'm going to go to the octagon. I'm going to go to that meet. I'm going to end up paying you more money after I've already paid you. Like, come on,
Yeah.
man.
So, in any event, let's go through a couple of what got named. So, Mound City, which is the small sort of rounded square up there in the top of this illustration, this is the lithograph in Ancient Monuments. That is where the headquarters building is and the museum for the Hopewell Culture National Historic Park is. And Mound City was excavated, many of the mounds by Squire and Davis, and this is their map. The other larger circular earthwork down there is called the Shriver Circle, and that is so eroded away you can't really see it with the naked eye, but an archaeologist several years ago ran his magnetometer over it and was able to locate it. But he had to go inside the maximum security prison located there to actually inside the courtyard there finish off the circle. So part of that now exists in the maximum security prison in Chillicothe.
Jesus.
And there's an Army Corps of Engineers right down the road, too.
Right. Now, there's Squire's draft illustration. You'll notice it's sort of cut and pasted. So he probably had some other drawing underneath it and redrew that and then cut it out and then pasted over in a couple of places where those earthworks were. Now, what I'll say about Mound City is that Mound City has been reconstructed twice over. It was first destroyed by the federal government in World War I. They built a training camp there called Camp Sherman. And it covered this whole entire area and obliterated all of those earthworks. And after World War I, the Ohio Historical Society, now the Ohio History Connection, went and petitioned the federal government to excavate the remains of whatever mounds were there, which the federal government agreed to, and to then reconstruct it. There was a local guy by the name of Spetnagel who pushed the federal government into naming this a historical, a U.S. historic monument, which happened. And so this has been in federal ownership, forever, essentially. Well, the Ohio Historical Society back then reconstructed the earthwork based on this map right here because the earthworks were gone. And so in the 1950s, the park, which was kind of it was owned by the federal government, but the Ohio Historical Society had sort of leased the site as a park. And the locals who wanted this to become a historic monument were getting pretty frustrated that the Ohio History Connection, back then, Ohio Historical Society, was not improving it in any way. They had taken all the artifacts back to Columbus and were in the museum in Columbus. They expected that there would be a museum built on the site so locals could see the local artifacts. That didn't happen. And so they petitioned the federal government to kick them out, and they did. The National Park Service then took over the site, and they determined that the Ohio Historical Society, who had been given a lease to operate the site as a park, was not given a lease to do the excavations of the mounds and take all the artifacts. And so they requested the return of all that, which the Ohio Historical Society refused to do for more than a decade. So no, we're not doing it, and refused to give the artifacts back until there was essentially going to be some federal action against them, and then they coughed up all the stuff, and so all that got returned to the federal government.
You don't own this
You're
stuff.
not really endearing them to me.
You don't own this stuff. How can you own history?
Inexplicably, in the 1960s, the National Park Service archaeologists decided that they better go through and re-excavate all this stuff to figure out whether or not they did the right job. They did not find that the Ohio Historical Society did an appropriate job in reconstructing the mound sites, found that some of them were located in the wrong places, and so on and so forth. So they re-excavated the entirety of it and reconstructed the entirety of it a second time.
Jesus.
And that was with the cooperation of the head curator of the Ohio Historical Society at the time, Raymond Bobby, was involved in that. They were contracted by the federal government to provide those archaeological services. They then never wrote the final archaeological reports that were part of the contract. And it took another 10 years after the excavations were completed and the reconstruction was done before, like into the 1980s, before they finally gave the final excavation reports to the federal government.
Just absolute laziness, corruption. I mean, come on. What are we looking at here, people? Is this
all of this is detailed in the administrative history of Mound City, by the way. I didn't uncover that stuff. It's written about in the administrative history. So in any event, you can see there's some differences between these, gateways are in different locations and so on and so forth. But here is another earlier illustration by Squire. That's quite a difference between the Shriver Circle and the Shriver Oval there.
Yeah.
We'll show you another one here. So he had done a full-page version of Mound City. Again, this got consolidated into this double map. And so this is Squire's full version. Of course, this has never been published. This was not used by the different organizations to reconstruct the site. This might have been more helpful to see where all the mounds are located, more specifically with measurements and all kinds of stuff. Here's another version. This is the most interesting version. This is Davis's version. Okay, now I don't know if you can see on the left side that Shriver Circle illustration has really dark lines to it as compared to the Mound City illustration above, right?
Yeah.
Okay, those really dark lines are to depict ditches.
Concave.
Yes. And then the lighter versions are showing the earthwork itself. Mm-hmm. So what do you see in Davis's illustration here is you see the outwork of the earthwork
Concave.
in an interior ditch.
Yeah.
Which none of the other maps show.
Are you telling me?
And that is not part of the reconstruction.
No, it's a total built up wall around the entire site.
Right. Well, this has a wall, but this shows that there was a ditch there.
Like Newark Circle, where there's a ditch that makes that.
Now, whether or not that's true or not, is
Wow. I mean, it
they
makes
should
sense.
maybe reevaluate that and maybe go out there and test for that because Davis was much more meticulous in his artwork and in his survey work, and this is a really interesting survey of Mound City, with potential real world archaeological implications. Right. So that gives you some sense of that site there, and. Now, this site is the Hopewell Earthworks site. And so this is Squire's version of it. Can you read the title of that down in the lower right corner? I don't know. It's hard to read from this angle.
Yeah.
It's called, he has it labeled the North Fork Works.
Okay.
Okay. The branch of the river there is the North Fork of Paint Creek. And so that's why why it's labeled on there North Fork Works. In the text of Ancient Monuments, they don't call it the North Fork Works at all. They call it Clark's Works. If you notice, there are some buildings that are pictured in there. In kind of the center area, there's a house there that's labeled Clark's. He's the guy that owned the site. And so Squire refers to it in the text as Clark's Works. During Caleb Atwater's time, he also had a survey done of these earthworks that he included in his 10 earthwork list. And it was owned by two other guys at the time that I write about in the book. But in 1892, 40-some years after Squire and Davis, or 35 years or so, another archaeologist by the name of Warren K. Moorhead was hired by Frederick Ward Putnam of Harvard University to excavate the site on behalf of the World Columbian Exposition, more colloquially named as the Chicago World's Fair, in 1893. So in 1892, Putnam hired a bunch of archaeologists and went all across North and South America, and they excavate all kinds of stuff. And Moorhead started at Fort Ancient and excavated there, and then he moved to this site and excavated here. And he excavated many of the mounds during his time there, and he recovered about 400,000 artifacts from this site, which went on display at the Chicago World's Fair. And because he got the cooperation of the current landowner, he named the site after the current landowner, whose name was Mordecai Cloud Hopewell, former Confederate war soldier.
Oh, my God.
And so the Hopewell Culture National Historic Park is named after former Confederate soldier Mordecai Cloud Hopewell.
Which, how does that connect with anything? And that's where you get the name of the Hopewell culture, right?
Correct.
And that's named after a whole race of ancient people. That's like calling the Egyptians the Hopewells.
That's right.
Like, what?
It's so ridiculous.
The Chevrolets.
It is so ridiculous.
The Ford Earthwork.
It's a really terrible practice from the archaeological community that they name the site after the landowner, the current landowner. So we could have had the Clark culture, or we could have had it named after the guys that Atwater, had it around. But it was because of the popularity of the exhibit at the Chicago World's Fair and the fact that two guys from the Smithsonian also helped Moorhead excavate here, as well as Harvard University, that in the archaeological community of the day in the 1890s, this became known as Hopewell's and Hopewell's culture, right?
Wow.
And it wasn't until the early 1900s that William C. Mills of the Ohio Historical Society then compared the artifacts from this site to the Adena Mound site that he had excavated and determined that those were two separate, different peoples on different time frames. This is long before carbon dating or anything like that. And so he determined that those were separate cultures, archaeologically speaking. And so that sort of became codified at that point, that This is now Hopewell culture
Gotcha.
versus Adena culture versus another group, Fort Ancient culture.
I guess just to keep your ducks separate a little bit back then, to at least, I get it, but it just doesn't seem
It's a
like
nomenclature issue. Right?
absolutely, absolutely. But it's also just, to me, it speaks more of like to really digging for the answers of who were the constructors, or what's going on, like where did this go?
Yeah.
I don't want to just describe random.
It's just super unfortunate that now it's named after some Confederate war soldier, right?
I agree.
Okay, so here is Squire's illustration, draft illustration of that. And you can see there's a lot more detail on here. And we'll show you a couple more versions of this. So there's Atwater's version from 1820. And one of the things that I did once I understood the issue with ancient monuments being these illustrations being attributed to Squire and Davis, but not really by them. It was really by these lithographers and the woodcutters.
Ghostwriters.
This is the same situation with Atwater.
Oh.
And so,
okay.
So the American Antiquarian Society in Massachusetts published this. So I reached out to the American Antiquarian Society in Massachusetts and I asked them if they had any of the original illustrations that Atwater had sent to them for this publication. And out of the 10, they had 5. And so I have all 5 of those in my book from 1820. And so I don't have them here, but I'll show you. Yeah, there it is. I put it on the cover. It's also included in the illustration. This is the color edition, hardcover edition, volume 1. That illustration there, it was in color. A color map of the Hopewell Earthworks from 1818 and made it into Atwater's publication in 1820. And so I go into the historical details of that in the book. So
that's incredible.
I put it on the color. Amazing that it's in color. First of all,
that's what got me. Yeah, I was like, what do you mean in color?
But it's not the only one.
Really?
In fact, Atwater's version of the Newark Earthworks is in color. And so that one from around 1818. Atwater's version of the Fort Ancient Earthworks in color from 1807.
That's so crazy.
And so I included all of those and talk about all those in the book. And they're amazing color illustrations. Again, never before published, never before cited by the archaeological community. It's just shocking. It's absolutely shocking. So
it's incredible.
In any event, that's a little fun tour down history lane with Atwater stuff. Now, there's the full kind of version of that I put on the front. You can see part of it's torn at the bottom corner there, and there's a little red mark up at the top. So this is really early work, and you can see that there's some differences between the details that are seen here versus 35 or 40 years later around the time that Ancient Monuments was published, how the site had changed after being farmed for that long, right?
Yeah.
That's not the earliest version.
Hello.
Okay. This version is actually. This is Squire's version from his field notes.
Yeah.
It's kind of really squished or whatever. But I put it up there so people see what he was working with when he went out to the site. And then there's this version.
Whoa.
Which I believe is the earliest version.
Wow.
And I flipped it upside down to correspond with all these other maps, but you can see the writing there is, turned around.
Yeah.
The writing that's on there, ironically, has nothing to do with earthworks. It's like a bunch of information on plants and stuff.
Weird.
Medicinal usage of plants.
Oh, that's interesting.
But the drawing was done by Dr. Daniel Drake, medical doctor from Cincinnati, Ohio. And he went around and he did survey maps of about 20-something sites about 10 years before Atwater. And he aimed to publish all this. And he had written a manuscript, but it never got published. But I uncovered his manuscript. His manuscript is located at the Wisconsin Historical Society. And I was able to use that material, and I transcribed all of his notes. Again, never before published, never before cited. So this dates back to somewhere between 1807 and 1815. Don't have an exact date, but sometime in that time frame. And actually, there's another version of it that that Drake did that has the exact survey measurements and all the, marked out on the map itself. So
This is cool.
yeah. So here is the Hopeton Earthworks. I mentioned those earlier. This is one of the 7 UNESCO World Heritage Sites now. This is part of the Hopewell Culture National Historic Park. This is literally across the Scioto River from the Mound City. It's literally on the other side of the river. And
Open to the public?
it's open to the public.
Okay.
Yep, you can go and visit this one. And most of it is destroyed. What the National Park Service has done, they did a magnetometer survey of the site, and they have identified where the walls of the earthworks were located, and they're now cutting the grass in the shape of the earthwork. They call it interpretive mowing. And so you can sort of go out there and visually see the representation of the earthwork where the grass is taller.
Wow.
So it's a unique way of representing the earthwork. Rather than reconstructing it, they just mow the grass in the shape of it.
Why not reconstruct it?
That's a great question. I've asked that to the National Park Service. I don't know. They seem reluctant, but
Don't understand. These people think backwards to me.
yeah.
All these institutions.
Right. Well, anyway, so here's Squire's drawing of that. Again, another cut and paste job.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I want you to pay attention to the little box in the lower right. You see those 2 weird kind of circular earthwork things? Okay. And I also want you to pay attention to the big avenue coming off of that.
Okay.
So the intersection of that is at the circle and the square, right? Is where that path comes in there. And you're going to see some changes when we look at some of these other versions. Okay, so
Whoa.
What just happened?
That's going directly into the side of the square now.
yes, but in pencil you can see another avenue there, right?
Were there 2?
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah.
Now
there-
It's
2
very
avenues.
faint.
the 2 earthworks in the little box down the bottom are actually on the other side of the highway today, and that is those
wow.
other 2 shaped earthworks. So now you have some sense of scale.
Yep.
And where those earthworks were located versus being in this weird supplementary box down in the corner.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And the shape of the kind of the double circle is now warped into this weird like heart shape,
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting. Okay. So significant differences here between these drafts. Here's another version. Okay. Now this is flipped around. I found this in Squire's papers. It looked like he had traced this. And I tracked down the, Dr. Brett Ruby, archaeologist at the National Park Service, had actually tracked down the original drawing before I had seen Squire's version of it. And so that was published in a magazine in like 1809. And I tracked down that original illustration, which I'll show you here in a second. But note where the pathway is that comes off of the circle, not the square.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. And it terminates in another circle. Okay?
Okay.
Circular enclosure, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, those double parallel lines across that are damaged to the original photograph. Many of the films that I got from the Library of Congress had that damage, and there's nothing I could do about that. It's on the original photo, but it's not part of the drawing. So, in any event, this is what I also found at the Wisconsin Historical Society. Daniel Drake had copied this survey from an early governor of the state of Ohio, Thomas Worthington. And you'll notice, you can see Hopeton there. And where does the path come from? The circle, right? Not the square, not the intersection of the circle and square, but it comes off the circle, like that early map from 1807. Well, this is from about 1809 with all of the detailed survey measurements on it. The circle on the other side, on the left side, is actually the Shriver Circle on the other side of the river. Okay? Now, what's interesting about this long pathway ending in this circle is what's inside the circle. This is the only Earthworks survey map that I've seen that has this detail on it. It says that at the center of that circle was a standing stone, and it gives the dimensions of the standing stone. And so there's notes about the standing stone that was at the center of that little earthwork circle.
Wow.
So that's really interesting. And who knows what happened to that circle? It's obviously not there any longer. But you can see the importance of these early survey maps with all of this additional detail that you don't even see in ancient monuments, and yet eventually wound up as sort of watered down versions in ancient monuments, right?
Censored almost, right? Censored. I mean,
Not necessarily censored.
Not
just
censored, but
they're artistic impressions. That's what I like to say.
Yeah.
Well, I like the little like behind the scenes clips and quotes and all.
Yeah,
like what
that's
you're saying
really
there.
neat.
That's
Right.
like the old VH1 behind the music. How'd you write that song? What did you know?
Exactly.
But
So here's another
info.
example of some of those early versions. So what you have on the left is from ancient monuments. That is the High Bank Earthworks, which is a circle connected to a kind of a squarish octagon and a bunch of other earthworks around it. What does the earthwork octagon look like in the one on the right? It looks more like a stop sign octagon, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a significant difference between those. Now, this one
Almost
was
looks like a
I
clock.
found amongst Squire's papers.
Well, it's the calendar.
And this is kind of a mystery to me as to who made this survey. The only notation on it is down in the left corner. There's a little notation that says Anastatic Press. And I had to track that down. I'd never heard of Anastatic Press before. They operated in England, and the name refers to the process of the printing that they were doing. It is the anastatic printing process, which was patented by the Siemens Corporation in the 1840s, and a company out of England bought the patent rights to do the printing. And basically, instead of lithography, where you do the engraving on the stone or on a woodcut, you can take any illustration at all, pen or ink, and apply it to a special metal plate, mostly made out of zinc, and it transfers the illustration to the metal itself, and then you can use that metal to do your printing. And it was kind of like maybe like almost like the earliest photocopying kind of thing. And this was made by Anastatic Press, and somehow it wound up in Squire's possession and in his papers with that weird octagon version. So it has to be earlier than Squire's version, but I have no idea who made it, or how Squire managed to get a hold of it, or how it got to England to go through the Anastatic Press process. And then wound up all the way back in Ohio. I have no idea why that's
funny.
the case.
Yeah, it's a weird chain of custody.
So it's kind of a weird story, but and maybe one yet to uncover more information about.
So weird.
But I've never seen an actual printed version of it in a publication anywhere. And I went through a bunch of Anastatic Press had a publication that printed all kinds of illustrations through the 1840s and 50s, and I looked through what's online, and I never found anything that showed this. So,
Gotcha.
I mean, there may be something out there. I don't know.
I mean, I feel like we're getting a knowledge of early printing technology.
Oh yeah, exactly.
This is more than history. It's like, wow.
So here's another version. This is Squire's, draft. And this is a little hard to discern from here. Maybe your eyeballs might be eagle eye, but you notice that long pathway that leads from the octagon towards the lower left corner.
Yep.
In the finished version on the left, about halfway down, you'll see there's a couple of mounds that are across that pathway. There are 3 of them.
Oh yeah.
Well, if you look at Squire's draft,
2.
There's 4 of them.
Oh.
It's 4 across.
Yeah. Okay.
Versus 3 across in the final version. So those are real world implications for how wide is that pathway? How many mounds are there? Those are the kinds of details that differ between survey draft, and the lithographic print. It's lots of stuff like that. Lots of little minute details that make a difference in the real world. So, then you have that version, which I talked about, anesthetic. This is the version by Charles Whittlesley that was made for the Ohio Geological Survey, which I think is the one that was used for the octagon. Squire borrowed Whittlesley's papers, and there's actually a note in red down at the bottom. It was really interesting. Whittlesley, after the fact, when he got his papers back from Squire, went through and wrote in red ink every one of them that he loaned to Squire for ancient monuments. And that's how you can tell which ones did Whittlesley get credit for and which ones didn't he get credit for, but which were used.
It's that easy to tell.
It was that easy to
So
tell.
he literally passed you notes all the way until you found it. Like, hey, Jeff, when you get this, give me credit.
What's for you, man?
Seriously. That's so funny, too.
Writing notes to the future.
Now, I want you to look carefully between all of those sort of miscellaneous earthworks on that pathway, and down towards the lower left, versus what Charles Whittlesley surveyed. They're wildly different.
Wait.
I mean, they're wildly different. And so, Whittlesley was a really good surveyor and was much more meticulous than Squire. And so I think that there's something really screwy about this map. There's a lot of...
How far apart were they done in between?
I can't even tell where
about 10 years.
Do you think there's a possibility there was construction added on in between the two?
No, I don't think that was the case.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of farming that was going on. And maybe what's on the left is a lot of interpretation. Like they walked around and they sort of interpreted the remains of what they saw. And versus what Whittlesley actually surveyed.
Gotcha.
There's a difference.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Man, those are definitely 2 different...
Okay, so this is an interesting kind of another constructed map by Squire. This is of the earthworks in the Paint Creek Valley, not the North Fork, but the main fork. And so you have, from the left, you have the Sipe Mound earthworks, then the Baum earthworks near the center. Then you have Spruce Hill, which is kind of an earth and stone earthwork. And then kind of above the creek is another earthwork known as the Bourneville Circle. And then you can kind of see the little village of Bourneville up there too. And so this is, and there's another earthwork down there. Some people call it the Bear Claw or whatever. It's another earthwork down below Spruce Hill.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Squire's sort of constructed map of all of those earthworks down the valley. And this was modeled on another map by Atwater. Now, so here's Squire's draft of it all. So not much difference between that and the lithograph. But then you have, let me show you Atwater's version. So here's Atwater's version, and so you can see Sipe and Baum and Spruce Hill, and then there's a letter designation up above there for the Bourneville enclosure. It's not drawn out in this engraving print, which this appeared in 1820. So Squire clearly modeled his map on this map, but he added more details. course, you never give Atwater any credit for that, or the surveyors that Atwater used to make all of this. But nevertheless, I found Atwater's original map, or got it from the American Antiquarian Society, in color, partly.
Nice.
That's so cool.
And so this has a lot of additional details on the map, and a lot of notes, which I transcribed, which are in the book. One of the interesting things is in the middle of the Serpent Mound earthworks, Atwater mentions that there was a small mound a couple of feet high, which was made entirely of red ochre. And that is on the map in red. It's because this is in color. He designated it in red. And what's interesting about that is right at the bend of the creek there around the Serpent Mound earthworks, part of the reason that Paint Creek got its name is because of the minerals used as paint by the Indians right there at Little Copperas Mountain, which is right there at the curve. That's where some of that red ochre can be found. And so they literally dug it out of the hillside, but they had a whole mound of it that covered a burial, allegedly. By Squire and Davis's time, Squire is incredulous at that comment and says, that is not what we found. This is what we found in that mound, and he lists a whole bunch of different things. And so it makes you wonder whether or not he was looking at the same mound or not, because clearly the people that did this survey, Atwater didn't do the survey. It was a couple other guys that did the survey for Atwater. They clearly had seen it with their own eyes and painted it red on their map.
Wow!
And yet Squire says, no, that doesn't exist. And so it's one of those bizarre, sort of things. But these are kind of, interesting, important details. So this map dates to like 1818, like really, really early map.
Yeah.
So here's the Fort Ancient Earthworks, yet another UNESCO World Heritage Site. I should mention back on this other map that only of these earthworks here, only the Serpent Mound earthworks was designated as a World Heritage Site. The other two have not been.
Gotcha.
Okay. And just to kind of understand why that's the case, the National Park Service and the State Department, one of their criteria is to forward a nomination for UNESCO World Heritage status to be voted on. The first criteria that needs to be met is that the site has to have be designated as a United States historic monument. And so these other two sites have not been. Serpent Mound Earthworks was.
Gotcha.
But the other two sites have not been.
Okay.
So Fort Ancient is also one of the 7 UNESCO sites. This is owned and operated by the Ohio History Connection. This map was credited by Squire as being done by John Locke from the Ohio Geological Survey. Mm-hmm. But Locke did it after the Ohio Geological Survey ended. He did it around 1842. I'm going to show you Locke's published map. And so this is what you have here. Now, there's Locke's map, and I've rotated it to kind of try to match. And they're fairly close. Not exact. Mm-hmm. Locke got together with a local school academy and had about a dozen school age, maybe like high school age kids who helped him to do the survey. And I list all those people in the book. Fort Ancient is huge, and it would take you forever to try to survey the site out. So he had a whole team of people that helped do that survey.
Right.
But Locke is generally credited as doing this. Let me see if I got, so there's Atwater's version. Okay. Now, Atwater's version includes another big long extension, right? Coming off of that. That is shown as a sort of a supplemental feature in the lithograph in the lower right on the left image. is you can see that long linear thing. There's actually the long linear thing in the upper right corner of Atwater's map, which ends, again, in another enclosure with a mound in the middle of that enclosure.
That's so weird.
Similar to like Hopeton, right?
Why were they leaving these off?
Good question. But it obviously changes the map and the whole of the earthwork, right? So this is one of the maps that I got from the American Antiquarian Society. So you can see what the printed version of Atwater's, sort of map looks like. And that was done by taking an original illustration and then carving it into wood, right? So it's super simplified. But the original survey map is much more extensive. And it's hard to tell here, but it shows that full entire thing with the extension, right? Just like on Atwater's map. But you see there's all kinds of writing all over the map. Those are all kinds of notes. It's in color. It shows where all the water courses are. And it has all kinds of archaeological details of the site, all kinds of archaeological features that they talk about. And this was surveyed in 1807 by the Warren County surveyor. And he almost didn't get this map to Atwater. It was lost in the mail. It literally, the courier tried to cross a river, and it wound up floating down the river, and somebody else picked it up and got it to Atwater. And so it
a neighbor back then.
It almost never made it to Atwater. Atwater writes about this in his letter to the American Antiquarian Society, which is really interesting. But I talk about the Warren County surveyor and his background, and I hunted down a lot of that stuff. He was a Quaker, and he moved to Ohio, in the earliest days doing land surveying, and so he also had an assistant. And I talk about who the assistant was too. But in any event, really early detailed stuff. Again, never been published before, never been cited before.
That one's lucky to have made it.
Yeah. I don't know. You seem like you've taken a break already. Do you want to stop for a second?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's an emergency.
So I mentioned Spruce Hill a few minutes ago. This is the Spruce Hill earthwork. This is Squire's full-page version of that. The walls of this are mostly made of stone and earth mixed together.
Yeah.
And let me show you here. This is his draft of that.
Wow.
Okay. So they're fairly similar in between the two drafts. They're not a lot of differences. But I want to show you Squire's earlier draft of it. So this is much more detailed. It shows a lot of property boundaries. It shows directions to other nearby earthworks, which is important. And it shows some details of features in Paint Creek, which Atwater wrote about, and which Squire dismisses as being anything. So what Atwater wrote about was that in Paint Creek, they found several what appeared to be constructed wells with stone, circular, about 3 feet across, with blocks of cut stone down into the bed of the river. And Atwater and they had lids to them, which when they were discovered, somebody tried to peel off one of the lids and broke it. And so, Atwater writes about that feature. Squire says that it's a natural thing and it's not a constructed thing at all. And again, dismissing what Atwater had written, 25 years earlier or whatever. So the features were still there, allegedly, maybe, when Squire was there. Since that time, there's never been an archaeologist that's ever gone out there and reported on those features or even looked for them, as far as I know. And in fact, very little archaeological work has ever been done about this site. Brett Ruby from the National Park Service did a very minor excavation along one of the gateway walls down at the very southern portion of it, around the year 2000, I think. Not a lot. this is an enormous site. One of the most important, earthwork sites. I worked on a effort to preserve this site around 2007. It went up for auction, and we had about 2.5 weeks to raise about $1.5 million to save this site. It is now owned by the Arc of Appalachia. At the time, they were known as the Highland Nature Sanctuary, and they were the lead organization that helped to preserve the site. But myself and my wife, Friends of Serpent Mound, we also helped on raising all the money for that.
Kudos.
Yeah,
Good job.
they really did a good job with that.
Oh, yeah.
So
That's awesome.
here
All right,
is what I
then.
think is the earliest survey done, again, by Daniel Drake. And the dots around the outside are his survey points. And he's got the measurements and the degree measurements for all those different features and sites, and I include this in the book. So this is probably a survey of it from, I don't know, sometime between 1807 and 1815. Again, never cited, never published before, but earliest survey for sure. He had a second version of it, a little more cleaned up, again showing the gateways down at the bottom, just like all the later ones showed. Interestingly enough, though, in the book, I don't have it in this presentation, but in my book, he also did a drawing of one of the wells, and he shows the cut blocks in his drawing. So, Daniel Drake, 5 to 10 years before Atwater, had already seen those features and had drawn them out. And so I include that illustration in the book too.
Squire just doesn't seem like the most well-balanced judge of certain things in some of these instances where he's like, oh, of course,
Again,
you just...
he wasn't trained as a
He
scientist.
seems irrational.
And he's, a young
Wild
guy.
dude.
He's in
It's
his
a wild dude.
mid-20s,
What? He
right?
said me like, dude, I was a complete moron when I was 25.
But why would we listen to this guy if he's not trained in any of that? How did he get to put
'Cause
his
he wrote a
stamp of
thick book.
approval on it? Right.
Yeah.
But
he became the man.
The victors write, the history.
And there was
right?
no internet.
Yeah, no internet.
Hey,
All right, so here we are back to my original bit about Serpent Mound. So there's the final version in Ancient Monuments on the left. And here it's dated to 1846. That's what Squire and Davis, said is 1846 is when they went and visited it. And this is a test lithographic print that I uncovered at the Western Reserve Historical Society. They have a collection of Squire's papers, and their collection of Squire's papers included all of the test lithographic prints for ancient monuments. So when Squire went to New York City and was working with Cerrone and Major, they would work on doing the lithograph, and then they would print off a test print, and they would hand it to Squire, and Squire would look at it, and he would make editorial comments on it. If something was spelled incorrectly or something was in the wrong place, and those are the marks that you see X'd out or whatever on there, and then he would resubmit it, and they would make their corrections, and then they would run another print. And so there's literally a stack of all of the test lithographs from ancient monuments at the Western Reserve. And so I include a handful of them in my book, some that are more notable than others. In fact, there was one test lithograph of a mound site in Wisconsin that was never included in ancient monuments. And so I include that in the book. It's a kind of a mystery as to where it came from. Don't know who did the survey of it, but nevertheless, it's an important site in Madison, Wisconsin, and it's called the Dividing Ridge Earthworks today, but had not been surveyed by anybody at the time that these lithographs were being printed, as far as anybody could tell. So kind of an interesting one. I might have a picture of it in here somewhere. But this is another test lithograph with different editorial marks on it. So you would see that there was a kind of a process on how they kind of recreated this stuff. But I want to show you how different the original drawing was.
Boy. Look at the horns. And you can still see those, by the way, when you go there.
Yeah, the one on the north side is much
of the
more
serpent.
intact than on the south side, partly because it was reconstructed by Putnam in the 1880s, late 1880s. But one of the things you'll notice is that there's a really big mound kind of near the tail, spiral tail there.
Yeah.
On Squire's final version, it's a bit smaller, but it's labeled B. And this has been kind of a puzzle with archaeologists. First of all, the mound isn't there today. So, did this thing exist or did it not exist? Squire and Davis ostensibly went there, so it must be there, right? They included it in their map. But why did it get the name B? Well, some people thought, well, maybe Serpent Mound is Mound A, and that other mound is Mound B. But I don't think that's the case. And Squire and Davis's information about how they learned about Serpent Mound is really kind of shady. There's not a lot of information about it. They reported that they got a report from somebody that said that there was an unusual shaped fort there. And so they went out to look at it, and lo and behold, it turns out to be this big Serpent Mound. But they didn't say who gave them the information. They didn't say, where it came from or, whatever it was. But I think I figured it out. In James McBride's papers, which I reviewed, there is a survey that was done of Serpent Mound. And I think it was probably the survey that was done before Squire and Davis went there, and that's how they learned about it, because they borrowed all of James McBride's papers. So they didn't give him credit for informing them. But McBride's survey is very interesting. A lot of surveyors essentially survey from point to point. And so McBride's survey is literally a dot to another dot, to another dot, to another dot. So it looks like this weird zigzag. So he went to each point of the curve and did a survey from each point of the curve. And for the oval, it's just 4 dots that make like a diamond shape. He didn't survey out the whole, thing. So it's very rudimentary, but it's clear that that's what it is. You can see what it is,
yeah.
And so the idea that Squire got this information, doesn't credit McBride for doing the first survey, then they go out there and then they come up with this. Obviously there's some differences, right? This is much more detailed. Now, one of the things that archaeologists have commented on about this illustration is how terrible a survey of Serpent Mound this is, based on the print, right? The lithographic print. They've not seen the drawing that Squire made, right? If you look and compare the differences between the two, one of the things that the criticism has been leveled is, well, they got the curves all messed up on the other one. It's all screwed up. It's not the same. But if you look at the one over there, it's much more true to life than what the lithograph looks like. So the lithographers didn't do a really good job capturing what Squire did on the opposite side here. And I think that those are important details to understand. Some details on the lithograph don't appear on Squire's draft, like the central stone altar in the middle of the oval. That's not on Squire's draft.
Right.
However, in his field notes, it's there. And I think I have the field note illustration in here. I can show that here in a second. So it's kind of a mixture of stuff.
Yeah.
They knew that the detail was there, so he had the lithographers add it, but it's not on this version, right? So
the old stone altar, the mystery of the stone altar, that always fascinated me.
Mm-hmm. So here is one of the illustrations from Squire's field notes, and it shows the stone altar in the oval. Okay. Here is another drawing that he made. This is actually his notes, this is the entirety of his measurement notes on the left and his sketch on the right from his field notes.
Wow.
So not a lot of detail. I was hoping there would be more than this, but there's not a lot. And so that's the sum total of everything that Squire had in his field notes about Serpent Mound. Not a lot of detail, which makes you wonder if Davis did more of the work, and somewhere out there, maybe Davis's stuff will surface one day.
Yeah.
And, that would be exciting to see.
That would be really cool.
So in any event, different changes. One of the interesting things I found among Squire's papers was this drawing, which I think is related to his Serpent Mound stuff. Because what I'll show you on the reverse of this. On one side of the page is this spiral of a serpent, right? On the other side of the page, if I get to it, he has this drawing of this serpent going back and forth, and look what's down there at the bottom of it. You got the open jaws, and then there's this figure in front of it. And he's got a couple versions of it, and you can see the ink bleeding through the spiral on the flip side of the page. What I think is going on here is that Squire got information about what this site was, and he was attempting to work out in his mind what this site really was. And so he's doing these sketches about, well, it's this serpentine mound, and then there's this thing in front of the open jaws, and he's kind of drawn that out there. And then they said, well, and then there's a spiral, feature. So he's drawing this spiral serpent, and he's like got bits and pieces of it in
Before
his
he
head
gets there, yeah.
before he gets there.
It's like he's remote viewing it or something, and he's like, this is what I think it looks like.
This is what they're describing to me, what this thing is, right?
Yep.
That's what I think this is. And I found these notes in Squire's papers at the Library of Congress. So you can kind of see the thought process was.
Well, this spiral serpent, it's a spiral serpent. No, not like that. It's in the tail. And yeah.
How much longer you guys want to go? I don't even know what time it is. Wow, we're almost toward 11, huh?
You got a 2-hour drive back, so that's...
Well,
we can start.
Let's go with one more big story here.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Again, this is another one divided into quarters, right, to save money. But the one I really want to focus on is the one in the lower left corner. That's the Alligator Mound.
Yep, the alligator,
which is in Granville, Ohio.
Poor alligators surrounded by.
There's Davis's drawing of the Alligator Mound. I think that this drawing was the one that was used as the basis for the lithograph. You can kind of see how they took the intricate shading that Davis made of the earthwork and then had to try to recreate that for the lithograph in the area below, and how those details sort of change as a result of going from this more sort of advanced shading technique into what you see in the lower corner.
How do we get an alligator?
That's what I was going to ask, because that looks more like a possum or something.
That's a fair question.
That is a fair question, and I write about it extensively in the book.
Okay, it's not just me where I'm like, did I fail the test? I don't get it.
There's a
big section that I call How the Alligator Mound Really Got Its Name.
Okay, perfect. Perfect.
And I'll get to that here in a second.
No problem.
But I want you to see how much more detailed Davis's work is versus what Squire's is. And you wonder if Davis had been responsible for doing all the drawings, how much better we would have had a quality, in terms of the artwork.
Davis's name should have came first.
Davis looks like a legit artist.
Yeah, he's good.
Better than what I can do.
Talented. He's doing science. He's doing archaeology. He's an artist. I mean, the guy's talented. Medical doctor. Wow.
He had pioneered some surgical practices too. He was a surgeon. All right, so this drawing right here is how the Alligator Mound got its name. When Squire and Davis were working on researching the book, do you see that map in the lower right corner? Mm-hmm. That's another one of these constructed maps. And that was one of the few that I did not find a sketched version of in Squire's papers. But on this map, just to the east of where the Alligator Mound is located on that map is another hilltop earthwork fortification. And Squire and Davis did a survey of that, and I have drawings of that in the book, draft illustrations of it in the book. And it's in the Ancient Monuments, too. But while they were there, they learned about the Alligator Mound, which was just to the west, about a mile, mile and a half.
Okay.
But they didn't go and survey it at the time. What they did was they wrote to the landowner. Landowner's name was Aylesworth. And Aylesworth took a few months before he responded to Squire and Davis, and he wrote them an 8-page letter. And in the letter, he describes that he wanted to appropriately answer Squire and Davis's many questions about the mound on his property, but that he didn't know at the time much about the thing, and so he decided to educate himself a little bit about mounds and earthworks and about this mound in particular before he responded. So that took him several months to do. He then did an excavation into the mound, a major excavation. He excavated a bunch of different parts of this thing. And he describes all of them and his findings in this letter back to Squire and Davis. And on the final page of the letter is this illustration with the measurements, and down there, upside down to our view, but down there in the lower right corner, he calls it the Alligator Mound. That is the only place in the letter that he refers to it as the Alligator Mound. In the rest of the letter, starting from the very first sentence down through the whole entire thing, he calls it the Crocodile Mound, the Lizard Mound, the Dragon Mound, the Reptile Mound. He sometimes calls it the Image. And he uses those interchangeably, all interchangeably. And so the very last page, he says it's labeled the Alligator Mound. Squire and Davis, on their drawing, have it in quotations. Alligator, in quotations, mound, based on what Aylesworth named it. He's the landowner of it. He named it that. So they use that nomenclature because that's what Aylesworth named it. That's how it got its name.
Wow.
Okay.
Again,
Now,
no expert of the history of what the.
Right. Now, the reason that this is important and the reason that I write about it extensively in the book is because that is not the story that is being presented to the public over the past 30 years.
Okay, do go on.
Okay. So in the early 90s, there was an effort to try to preserve this mound by a group called, I think it was called the Licking County Archaeological Society. And the guy who headed that up, and Brad Lepper from the Ohio Historical Society, co-edited a book about a bunch of the earthworks in the Licking County area, including Newark Earthworks and the Alligator Mound and some other mounds. And in one of the chapters, each of them were written by different people. The one that was written by the guy from the Licking County Archaeological Society, a guy by the name of Paul Hogue, he wrote that he believed that perhaps, maybe, the Alligator Mound might have gotten its name from the earliest settlers that went to Granville and may have encountered some Native Americans, and they told them that name, and they sort of maybe mistranslated it. Okay, and so that was what appeared in Paul Hogue's doctoral thesis that he wrote, and in this edited book that he wrote in his article, which was largely based on his academic work. Several years go by, and a developer buys the whole farm property, including the Alligator Mound, and an effort is made to convince the developer to preserve the mound, which he agrees to in the middle of a cul-de-sac in the housing development that he is planning there. And so they basically draw a circle around the mound and enclose it in a cul-de-sac in the neighborhood. And he gifts the cul-de-sac property to the Granville Historical Society. And as they were bulldozing around for creating the cul-de-sac, one of the bulldozers clipped the front left paw, southern paw of it, and kind of exposed some of the interior, which somebody identified as saying, well, I think that looks like charcoal or something in there. So they contacted the Ohio Historical Society. Lepper comes out, and he scoops up some of that material and sends it off for carbon dating and gets a carbon date, which he doesn't particularly like very much. And so he petitions the Granville Historical Society, who owns the site, if he can do a bigger excavation into it, which they allowed him to do essentially illegally. The developer...
okay.
The developer, when he gifted the property to the Granville Historical Society, it was under the condition that at no time ever in the future, in perpetuity, is there to be allowed any digging into the mound. No excavations. And Lepper somehow convinced them, let me do it, I'll do it. And so they did. And he dug into the mound. And he got different carbon dates, which he liked better, and he published that. And in his...
What didn't you like about the first one?
Well, it didn't match his theory.
See, now this is the stuff we talk about all the time
in his
on this show.
peer-reviewed scientific paper that he published on this, much of the article is about how did the Alligator Mound get its name. And he essentially steals Paul Hoag's idea, his co-editor's idea, from just a few years earlier. He says he came up with the idea in 1998. Which is several years after they'd already edited that book where Paul Hoag already put the idea forward. But nevertheless, he says that he came up with the idea, and he writes it out that the earliest settlers of Granville met with the Native Americans, and the Native Americans said that this is an image of Mizupishu, the underwater panther, and they said it's a big monster that lives in the water with big teeth and eats people, and the Granvillian dumb settlers said, oh, we know what that is. That's a crocodile. That's how the Crocodile Mound got its name, which is 100% complete invented nonsense. It came exactly from the landowner writing to Squire and Davis, which is why they put it in quotation marks. It has nothing to do with what Lepper has been telling everybody for the last 30 years. He has been going around on videos, on podcasts, and interviews.
Claiming this
You
story.
can't get away with this
Seriously?
stuff anymore, guys. You just can't.
Seriously? Hey,
For 30 years,
this
he's
shit's
gotten
gotta
a
end.
lot of mileage out of
claim
this
it,
story.
and we've got it right here.
This is
You've got
a
the
joke.
smoking gun. So sorry, Brad.
Shame on you,
Look
man.
for another route, buddy.
Shame on you, man.
Try again.
You're supposed to be a beacon of
As I write about in the book,
integrity.
I say
What
what
are we
Lepper
doing?
wrote is an archaeological hallucination.
Yeah.
This flat out just invented nonsense.
Taking some
It's just
ergot.
ego.
Yeah.
It's just
Getting some
ego.
ergot poisoning. Yeah, people are
In
crazy.
any event,
Wow.
it's right there. So I include this letter page in the book, and you can read about some of that in the book.
It's interesting.
I just wanted to. This is kind of rearranged version of that, but I did want to show some of the color illustrations that are in Davis's
Right?
unpublished manuscript, which is now included in my book. So if you buy the color edition, you can see them in color. The black and white edition, you can see them in black and white. But this gives you some better sense of what these artifacts, what kind of stone these artifacts are made out of. Different colors, and they're pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of stuff that they found. Davis tried to sort of group them and sort them, and he was kind of doing early typology of different blades. Obviously, there's no such thing as carbon dating or anything, so they didn't know about different, cultures of time or anything like that, or different usage rates. Here's some that has some obsidian pieces that they found and different ones. Of course, then there were all the little effigy mound pipes. All of these came out of one mound at Mound City. And in ancient monuments, they're not in color. And so you just get these black and white pictures of them. And out of the 5 or so slides I'm going to show you of these effigy mound pipes, many of these were not pictured in ancient monuments. And so they've not been generally pictured to the public. If you want to go see them, they're at the British Museum today. And if you want me to tell that story, I can, how they wound up at the British Museum. But nevertheless, you can see they tried very much to get the color correct on these, and they're very well detailed. Davis hired an illustrator in New York City to produce these. So these aren't done by Davis, but these are done by a different artist. But he commissioned these to be done. And, so you got some interesting ones. Now, I believe that one of the serpent ones down in the bottom row, I think, actually came from the Hopewell site and not from Mound City, but most of these are from Mound City. And again, several of them were not originally found. Now, I think this is close to the last slide that I brought, but this is a kind of an interesting collection of stuff that Davis had put together for this illustration. He calls them stone tablets. Mm-hmm. Now, the one in the upper left corner is called the Cincinnati tablet, and it's famous. Showing the front and the back of it, and the side of it, which is kind of an interesting way of looking at that. The 2 in the lower, or the 3 in the lower left, are of serpents, and those were all found in one particular mound at the Hopewell site. The one in the lower right I talk about very specifically because I don't believe Davis had that in his collection. He also did not have the Cincinnati tablet in his collection, but he had a cast of it made. The Cincinnati tablet was found in a mound in Cincinnati that was being leveled to create a road, and it never left the property owner's possession until after he died. And then it went to like this local newspaper publisher, Robert Clark in Cincinnati, and he eventually donated it to what is now the Cincinnati Museum Center. And so it's really had just a couple of people in its chain of custody. So we know kind of where that went. But Davis had gotten a cast of it. And so it wound up here in this collection of stuff. The other one down in the lower corner came from a mound in the complex of mounds that included the Grave Creek Mound in West Virginia.
Oh, boy.
It didn't come from the Grave Creek Mound specifically, but from a mound in that complex, because there were a bunch of mounds around it. And that's where that came from. And that was written by a guy by the name of Henry Schoolcraft, who was an anthropologist and Indian agent for Congress, who worked in the 1830s and 40s and into the 50s, wrote these huge volumes about the Indian nations in the United States, sent a lot of reports to Congress. He married an Ojibwa woman in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and lived in Upper Michigan amongst the Ojibwa for many years, and wrote quite extensively about Native Americans. And he wrote up and made that illustration, and that's sort of a copy of that illustration of that tablet from the Grave Creek Mound area. And then there's some other assorted bits and pieces there. There's kind of like a spool shown on end and on its side, and But I kind of wanted to show that little feature there. And I don't know if we want to go much farther. I could talk all night. There's so many sites. But one of the things about this that I talk about in the book is I mentioned the Grave Creek Mound. And there's a tablet that was found that was controversial, right?
Yeah. We've covered it. We've talked about it.
I refreshed my memory.
The Bat Creek Stone, the Grave Creek Stone, the Newark Holy Stone. These are all these like out of place artifacts that maybe have ancient Phoenician, ancient.
What was on this one?
Ancient Hebraic.
So it had some letter forms with kind of some lines that somebody was following to create the letter forms on it, and it was kind of a round tablet. And I talk about it extensively in the introduction of my book because Henry Schoolcraft was the first one to write extensively about that Grave Creek Mound tablet. And then Squire wrote about the Grave Creek Mound tablet in Aboriginal Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. And he writes several pages about it. And he essentially says that it's a fake. And his proof that it's a fake hinges on the fact that another guy who wrote a book before him about ancient peoples out of mounds didn't include it in his book. Therefore, it must be a fake.
Wow.
Which is bizarre,
zero
twisted
research.
Logic.
Just not good scientific logic.
Doesn't make sense.
And so the guy that wrote this other book, his name was Samuel George Morton. And Samuel George Morton is notorious because he's the guy that did all these cranial studies of people in which he would measure the volume of a person's skull and then from the basis of that determine like the class level or IQ or cultural
was this like
development
phrenology?
level.
Early eugenics.
Was this phrenology?
Probably.
Yeah, phrenology.
And so he was the guy that really developed the so-called science of that. And he had heard that the Grave Creek Mound was going to be opened and excavated. And so he sent a friend of his who lived in Wheeling, another medical doctor. George Morton was a medical doctor in Philadelphia. He sent another friend of his from Wheeling down to observe the excavations, hoping he might get a cranium from the excavations.
Sure.
And so that guy and another guy who was a newspaper editor of one of the papers in Wheeling, the two of them went to the excavations, and the excavations took months. And they observed the excavations as they happened and wrote detailed notes about the excavations. And when the excavation got to the center and they found, some burials and a bunch of artifacts, they then started digging up through the center. And as they dug up, they hit another burial chamber, found some more mounds, and found this engraved tablet with the letter forms on it.
It's all the way in there.
Okay. Now, the stuff that the reason that the mound was being excavated was the landowner wanted to open it up as like a living museum. You could pay your ticket and go in, and he hung lights in. They put like mine shaft stuff, and you could go in and see all the stuff in place in the mound.
It's big. It's huge. It's what at one point
there?
was the second largest, right? Or the third largest in America.
It's the largest conical mound.
Conical mound in America,
but it's the second tallest mound after Cahokia. Yeah,
yeah, it's big,
or maybe third.
It's
tallest.
still there. Yeah,
The mound is still there.
Yeah,
the shafts going in are not.
Yeah,
that's all
filled
collapsed and covered in or whatever. But for several years in the 1840s. Or late 1830s, you could go in there and see the stuff. Now, this tablet was not considered to be anything unusual or out of place, or that wasn't sensationalized. The guy that, you would think if he's opening a museum for economic reasons, they might, like advertise that they found this.
Yeah.
Nothing. This guy nobody thought it was anything big. In fact, James McBride and one of his co-surveyors went to go see the mound 2 weeks after it was open. And I found James McBride's notes about all of the contents that he observed, including the tablet. And he doesn't even say it's anything special.
What?
Okay.
This has been a hot button topic. This tablet is kind of a big deal.
So,
I think Will from Incredible History, we talked about this tablet with him.
Yeah.
By the way, just a little insider note. This is the mound where that Mothman was seen. The big Mothman sighting was at this big giant mound.
Didn't know that.
Above. Yeah, that was one of the Mothman sightings.
So,
Grape Creek Mound.
So Squire, says that it's because George Morton didn't include it in his book about cranium of these prehistoric peoples, then it's a fake. And ever since then,
that's what he based it off of, was the phrenology
and
guys.
they're still running with this.
now he wrote several pages on this in Aboriginal monuments.
This is terrible.
But when it came
work.
time to put it in ancient monuments, all of that was edited out.
This is just bad research.
Motive.
And the Smithsonian edited it out, and they replaced it with like a one-sentence thing that says essentially, well, this tablet is kind of controversial, and until we get more information about it, we're not going to write about it. Okay, so here, let me tell you a little bit of the rest of the story. So the medical doctor that went to go and observe the excavations, he wrote this extensive report and sent it to George Morton. And Samuel George Morton used some of the bits of the report in relation to his cranium stuff, because that's what his book was about. It wasn't about everything else. He just edited all the rest of that stuff out and didn't use that material in his report. He didn't think that it was fake or not fake. He didn't make any comment about it whatsoever. He just didn't include it because it didn't pertain to what he was writing about. Squire is the one that jumped to the assumption that meant that it was fake. But that was not the case.
It's just not what he was interested in.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, so because Squire and Davis's book was so notable and so popular and was so influential, the American Ethnological Society wanted to do an investigation to determine the authenticity of the tablet. Because Schoolcraft, before Squire had written his screed about it being fake, had written about how it was authentic. And that was published in the American Ethnological Society Journal. And then Squire comes along and says, no, it's a fake. And so there's this academic debate that was set up. And so they decided they were going to do a big investigation. And they hired this sort of historian / archaeologist who was from that area in West Virginia. This is before it was West Virginia, by the way. Still Virginia.
Jesus.
That didn't happen. West Virginia didn't happen until the Civil War. So this is still Virginia. So he's from Western Virginia in that area. And he later worked for the Smithsonian, but he went and he did this massive investigation, got affidavits from all the people who were, worked on the excavations, people who had seen the tablet, anything that had been written about the tablet. And he put together this gigantic report and then gave a presentation in New York City at the American Ethnological Society with Squire present, and showed all the evidence showed that the tablet was authentically found in the mound. Okay? Completely authentically found. Everybody testified that was the case. And that people testified as the patina on the tablet being authentic. There was no one that had seen the tablet and had examined the tablet that didn't believe that the tablet was not authentic. Squire had never seen the tablet in person. Okay? The guy who was the newspaper editor, who was accompanying the medical doctor that had gone down there, met up with Squire because Squire wanted to see the tablet on his way to New York City to do the lithographs for ancient monuments. They go to the town of Moundville, where the mound is, where Grape Creek Mound is, and the owner at the time was not there. The tablet was not available for them to view. Squire was in a hurry, never saw the tablet, jets off to New York City, writes his stuff, and that's how it ended up the way it ended up.
Garbage.
Okay? So the newspaper editor was furious when this came out, that because he provided the drawings and illustrations of the Grave Creek Mound and the tablet for Squire, which shows up in Aboriginal monuments, but not in ancient monuments, although the Grave Creek Mound illustration is in ancient monuments, doesn't credit the newspaper editor at all for the drawings and the illustrations. And so the newspaper editor was really, really ticked off about it. But he never wrote anything in his newspaper about it. But later on, he moved to Portsmouth, Ohio, became friends with a guy by the name of G.S.B. Hempstead, who Squire ripped off his map of to create the map for the Portsmouth Earthworks. They became friends. He established the public library in Portsmouth, Ohio. He's like a, kind of an advocate of the mounds and the earthworks.
Yeah.
And there was an old archaeological society of Ohio back in the 1870s, and they had a meeting in which they did the exact same thing. Big investigation on whether the Grave Creek tablet was authentic or not. Presented that material at that meeting. The attendees, all the so-called archaeologists in the 1870s, voted on authentic or not. Came down, it was authentic. Unanimously authentic. One of the people in attendance was Charles Whittlesley.
Oh, boy.
Charles Whittlesley had written 4 articles saying the tablet was fake. Had never seen the tablet in person.
But the problem is that this is still the narrative today. The Smithsonian says this. Ohio History
Is
Connection.
the tablet still around?
Ohio History
So the
Connection.
tablet is now missing today.
Yes, it's missing. And the Bat Creek stone.
Interestingly enough,
Oh my gosh.
Losing all my faith here.
another researcher acquaintance of mine,
What are you saying?
he went to the Smithsonian back 30, 35 years ago and was looking through some of their material about Squire and Davis. And they had photographs of Squire's artifact collection from the 1870s before Squire sold it to, or it was like 1860s, before Davis sold it to the people in England. And in one of the photographs is a Grave Creek tablet. So it's unclear whether Davis owned the original tablet or he owned like a copy of it, a replica of it, a cast of it. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that one of those casts, or maybe this particular cast that was in the photograph, wound up at a museum in Denmark.
What?
Hey, we got somebody over there. We're going to have to tell them to go check it out.
So
We got some listeners in
a
Denmark.
story that I
We just talked to him
uncovered,
this week over there.
Yeah.
We'll
a
send
story
him
that
over.
I uncovered was that
We'll talk to him.
a kind of an ambassador from Denmark visited New York City in 1860, went to a meeting of the American Ethnological Society. Davis and Squire were both members at the time. Davis was put in charge of a committee to go through the collections of the American Ethnological Society and pick out a handful of stuff to return the favor of a gift that they got from Denmark. The ambassador gifted them a bunch of prehistoric artifacts that were excavated out of mounds in Denmark. And so to return the favor, they were going to give them a bunch of artifacts from mounds in the United States. And so they combed through, and Davis was put in charge of the committee to determine what artifacts. And they come up with a list of about 15 artifacts, and Davis then gifts them another 15 from his own collection, including a cast of the Grave Creek tablet and several other casts. So I reached out to the Royal Museum of Denmark, and they said, yes, we have some of those artifacts still in our collection, and they sent me photographs of them. And they said, but back around the turn of the century in 1906 or 8 or something like that, they took some of those artifacts and sent them to another museum in Denmark called the Museum Odense. So I reached out to the Odense Museum, and their curator said, yes, we still have those artifacts, and they sent me pictures of the rest of those artifacts. So for all of those that believe that all of the Davis collection is at the British Museum, that is not the case. Some of the artifacts wound up in Denmark.
Everything's just scattered in the wind.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
How are we really supposed to put all this back together then?
Yeah.
Dude, you got to have Jeff's brain on it.
But
That's
even
how.
then, like, we still you can, but there's still going to be unknowns.
Oh, there's
like just
nonetheless,
complete disappearance.
At that meeting to give the results of the investigation of the guy in Western Virginia about whether the Grave Creek tablet was authentic, Squire got up afterwards to give some remarks, and these were covered in the newspaper articles of the meeting at the time. He thanked the investigator for his diligent work and agreed with him as to the tablet's authenticity based on the investigative work. Now, that never saw print. Like, Squire didn't write that down and publish that anywhere. It was a comment that was captured by the news reporters who wrote the articles at the time. But this is the thing, is if you talk to the archaeological community, they say, well, Squire said it was fake, therefore it's fake. They don't report that he recanted that. It's the exact same thing with Charles Whittlesley. Whittlesley wrote 4 articles saying the tablet was fake. Then he goes to this meeting where they produce the results of the investigation with all these affidavits and analysis of the tablet, chemical analysis, all this kind of stuff. And everyone in the room, unanimous, tablet is authentic, including Charles Whittlesley.
Right.
Who went and attended the meeting, was there as one of the vice presidents of the organization. And he voted to say in the affirmative, it's not a fake. Does that get reported? No. The archaeological community today still says,
yes.
Charles Whittlesley says it's a fake.
No.
Squire says it's a fake. Both of them recanted that position after the fact.
Didn't Brad Lepper write an article in the Columbus Dispatch like 10 years ago about the Grave Creek stone being fake?
I don't know. He
And
writes
how-
a lot of nonsense, so I don't really,
I mean,
follow
literally,
everything
like
he
not
says.
that long ago,
I don't know.
someone from OHC wrote an article.
He may have, because I think I recall that article. It was actually another person who did some investigation who now claims that the guy that the medical doctor that did the report for Samuel Morton, he actually paid for some of the excavations because they were going to stop excavating or whatever, and he wanted to see what was in the interior of it, so he helped pay for the excavations.
Here's another $20, guys. Let's get at it.
And so this anthropologist from New Jersey, I think, or New York City, now says, well, that's motive for faking the tablet so he could recover his money from the excavations. But they never publicized this. They never sold the tablet. They never really made a thing out of it to try to sell tickets. So the economic motive really isn't there. So I kind of dismissed that.
Or they're just really bad at being
But I think
flim-flam
Lepper
men.
reported on what that guy is, saying. But one of the things is that guy has never actually written an article. He gave a presentation somewhere and gave those results. And so you don't really know exactly what it is that he based any of that on. But nevertheless, whether the artifact is authentic or it's not authentic.
Look at the Wikipedia page about the Grave Creek stone.
It's just a pure academic debate
right
at
away,
this point.
it says
because no one knows where the tablet
faked
is.
Stone. Yeah.
And so there will be no way of assessing the tablet's authenticity unless the tablet turns up somewhere.
How can it be lost?
I don't know.
But some institution had it.
Well, there's lots of casts of it.
But who
But
had
the
it
authentic
last?
tablet,
Do we know?
No, nobody seems to understand where it disappeared along the way.
But we
because
don't-
nobody thought that it was that big of a deal at that time.
Right.
They clearly didn't.
No.
They clearly didn't. They didn't make much mention of it in their reports. The guy was only interested in a skull.
So I go through this history of all
craniologist or
this stuff
whatever.
in my introduction as sort of an explanation for why did this material get cut out of Aboriginal monuments and not make it into ancient monuments? And so I talk about some of that history.
Sure. It's interesting. It's really interesting. I mean, who knows how much still could be hidden? Just
Right. So we've talked
knows?
about maybe 15 sites, if that here, maybe 10, 12 sites.
Yeah.
But there are hundreds in the book, you
Yeah.
know, and there are hundreds of stories like this.
you're going to keep some readers busy for a long, long time.
Absolutely.
And like I said, you know, it was astonishing to me to find the material to begin with, to find out that none of it had been published before, and to say, hey, this stuff is really important.
Right.
We need to go back to the original primary source documents to understand the true history of this stuff. Here's all the original primary source documents. I put them in the book. So there should be no argument in the future.
Go figure it out. Yeah.
My authority says
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
My authority says
Nope.
that. No, just go back to the original source material. This is the original source material.
But they don't care. I don't think they really care. They haven't cared about the truth from the beginning. To me,
Well,
like
maybe some do,
things
some don't. I
gotta
don't know.
start turning. These institutions have to start.
Well, that
Owning
you have to hold
up
them
to-
accountable too. It's
Thank you. Hold them
Yeah.
accountable, but also
That's
like
part of what this book is about.
admit to
is
past
to
mistakes.
kind of correct the historical record.
going, hey, did you guys actually know that I could pick up all these records and put this together? And you could have done that, but you didn't do it in the first place. You know,
It's part of one of the reasons why I decided to publish the book myself rather than
Yeah.
send it out to an academic publisher. Because, first of all, an academic publisher isn't going to publish a work this big, 1,300 plus pages. That doesn't happen anymore. Second of all, I really did not want any of this material to be edited out because some editor somewhere doesn't like it for some reason.
Doesn't
I
fit their
wanted
thought
all these
process,
primary
yeah.
source documents to be reproduced so that people in the future have access to them and can see this stuff.
right.
Dude, thank
And
you.
can see all of the original writings by the original surveyors and excavators, from the time that they wrote it, rather than, some guy's interpretation 50 years later, or 100 years later, or 200 years later, so that people can actually see this original material. 'Cause
Sure.
it's never been seen. It's never been written about. So this is what I've been living with for 2 years.
That's
And-
a lot.
And,
Understand.
I'm happy that it's out there. I hope that people, view it and can talk about it because it's the Ancient Monuments is a book that's got a legacy and it's
Yeah.
still important today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And to give the rest of the story about it, I think makes it much richer and much more important to go back to.
Makes me far more interested in it,
100%.
knowing that it's been combed over again.
And speaking of that, I don't think we've talked about where we can find the book.
Oh, sure.
And now that we've kind of covered a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of what you've all put together,
Right, let me.
we do
While you're
have.
talking about that, I'll flip
Yeah,
back to that
yeah,
original
and-
slides. So the book is available exclusively at lulu.com. It's through print on demand. I decided not to put it through Amazon because I don't think Jeff Bezos needs any more of my money. Or anybody else's money for that matter.
Fair point.
He's like the richest guy on earth. He doesn't need any more money. So I did not make it available through Amazon. I made it available only through Lulu for that specific reason.
Yeah.
And I also don't want, a zillion copies printed around sitting in a warehouse somewhere. I'm
Yeah.
a little more ecologically minded. If you want it, they'll print you a copy and send it to you, kind of thing. And the quality is just top-notch, outstanding stuff. I was really, really pleased with how the quality of the book came out. So here is the 3 hardcover editions. Part of the reason that
Beautiful.
there's 3 hardcover editions and only 2 paperback editions is the manufacturer can only put so many pages into a hardcover edition.
Right.
And they could not squeeze all the pages into 2 hardcover. They could in a paperback, couldn't do it in hardcover, so that's why there's 3. The only difference between the 2 editions, the hardcover color edition versus the paperback, is I recognize how expensive these were. I wanted the highest possible print quality for the hardcover edition, so they're in color at the highest print quality on the highest quality acid-free paper. And so those are like archival editions. If you're really a fan of this book, are you really interested in this material?
It's high
but
quality.
they are expensive.
Yeah.
The paperback editions are in black and white, and I was able to combine them so they're a little bit cheaper.
Very cool.
But each one is, 600 to 700 pages each.
Yeah.
So.
I think people are going to want to. Again, you have some very interested parties in subject matter like this, so I don't think you're going to have a hard time with people going to really enjoy these books.
Got to get the word out,
and I mean thoroughly enjoy them, even in those.
Just to give you a sense of the cost of these versus the original edition, the original edition, which was published by the Smithsonian, sold for $10 a copy.
Wow.
In 1848.
lot.
If you run that through a inflation calculator, that comes to about $500 today.
That's insane.
So it's about $500 to buy an original edition back in 1848.
That's wild.
So if you buy the paperback editions, they're $79 each, so they'll cost you about $150 or $160, with shipping. But that's 3 times less than the original edition. If you want them in color, it's more expensive, but
I think it's worth it.
I think,
but you get an extra 1,000
hardcover
pages, and you get all this bonus stuff.
Yeah.
The only other difference between the hardcover editions and the softcover is because there was a third volume. I decided to write a preface for the second volume that's not included in the paperback edition, because I write an extensive introduction chapter and an extensive postscript chapter in the final edition. I decided to write an additional preface for the second edition, which is about ancient monuments in the 21st century, kind of the contemporary experience of it. I talk about how it was written during the pandemic, how it affected how I was able to access, the archives to get this material, how we can reproduce this material as it originally should have been seen versus going through the lithographic process or the woodcutting process back in the day. So you can actually look at the original surveyor's work, right? I talk about how this book may be one of the last books written without the aid of AI.
Oh, wow, yes.
ChatGPT. None of this was written with ChatGPT, partly because, almost all of this material has never been digitized before, and I made it a point not to create a digital e-edition of this book because it doesn't need to be in ChatGPT AI, for somebody else to rip off, because that's just a giant plagiarism program, right? It just plagiarizes the entire internet.
Pulls from everything. And so none of this material is fed into ChatGPT. You won't find it there. So, this may be one of the last books that ever gets written without that.
It's interesting.
And
thoughts.
so I kind of frame up the book in that sense, in that extra sort of preface.
Never even considered the era of real, human creativity, unadulterated,
We
might
lived through
be coming
it,
to an end,
and we're going to see it end
very soon.
I find that the extensive postscript chapter I found really interesting to write. There's a lot of little sort of interesting side twists to the lives of both Squire and Davis after Ancient Monuments came out and what happened to them and how they ended up. Squire, for instance, gets committed to an insane asylum at the age of 53. And that's a really interesting story of what happens to him.
What?
Wow. Well, all those years of lying, you just caught up with you.
He wound up in a debtor's prison in England for a few weeks, in the 1860s. He had some, he was appointed by Abraham Lincoln as a government ambassador to Peru during the Civil War to negotiate to get bat guano for making munitions for the Union Army. I mean, he did all kinds of crazy stuff. And so I talk a lot about their sort of postscript days.
Dude, back in the day, people accomplished a lot. I mean, at 25, he was already lived a whole lifetime.
Right. Yeah.
Well, you're not going to college.
I think he was 27 or 28 when Ancient Monuments was published.
But still,
maybe you're getting to work at like 14.
Yeah,
getting at discovering stuff at 17, or
well, there was no Netflix and TV, and
there's not a lot of distractions.
There's nothing
to slow
else.
you down back then.
Exactly.
You're gonna get to work, or you're gonna be real bored.
Squire and Davis died within 1 month of each other in New York City.
Interesting. Wow.
Davis is buried in Chillicothe in the cemetery. You can go and view his headstone. I have a picture of it in the book. Squire is buried in New York City in a cemetery in New York City.
Very cool.
But so I try to frame up the book in those different terms. I include several appendixes of some of their early magazine articles, which people have not really paid attention to read.
That's
so
cool.
Early versions of Squire and Davis's writings before Ancient Monuments, stuff like that. So
That's neat.
it's kind of a big, giant bonus. That's why I called it the expanded edition, because it's like, almost like the director's cut,
Yeah,
or something
yeah.
like that. Without them being around, it's a huge extra bonus stuff. So if you're a fan of any of their work, you'll hopefully learn a lot more from all the other stuff that I put in the book. So,
Well, I'll tell you what, man, you really deserve a lot of credit for the work you put into this, because nobody else except Jeff would do this.
It's a lot. I just remember hearing like, oh, hey, I don't know if it was first, second time we had it. We're like, oh, when's the book coming? Oh, it'll be. And then it was like, hey, Jeff ran into like 200, 300 more pages he's going to have to go through. I was like, what? Like, this poor guy, like, he's going to be buried under all
And
this
then
material.
Delcy out at
it was
Friends of-
wild to see that, I contacted a lot of different institutions about their collections that I thought might have some play in this. And it really wasn't until like springtime this year that a number of those institutions started sending me
back to you.
what they finally had. And
yeah.
I got hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff that I had to sift through and determine what I was going to use and what was interesting and what I put in the book. And,
Sure.
I tried to use as much as I thought had never been seen before, never been published before, never been cited before.
Yeah.
And it was just hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff, So I write, kind of historical commentary about the different bits, that fit in between. That's all integrated in. So you get, kind of a historical sense of a lot of this stuff and why it's important, what's important about it as we go along, who these different people were that did all of this work. Because, Squire and Davis didn't do all the work that's in Ancient Monuments. Like, 50 other people contributed stuff to that. And, I found their letters and their drawings and included all that material. So, wow. It was a fun process. I learned a ton. It was a lot bigger project than I ever thought was going to happen. But for me, the whole start of it was, can I find this early material of Serpent Mound? Check that box. So that covers, that'll be covered in my Serpent Mound book, which, I'm going to be beginning to write in, early next year after I get Emily Aldrich's book on the Portsmouth Earthworks done, and edited and published. Then, and that will be a book series. I like this is multiple volumes. That Serpent Mound book will be multiple volumes.
Yeah.
And that will be called the Serpent Mound Chronicles.
Cool.
And so that will be, volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. Maybe I'm thinking maybe is 7 or 8 volumes.
What?
So that's how much material I've got.
Jeez.
Bub can't even
7 or 8
comprehend
volumes.
that right now.
The volumes may or may not be as thick as these.
Here's
they
the
may be
thing
thinner, but
with Jeff, this is only one thing he knows about.
Oh, I know.
We could do
I
a
know.
5-hour podcast on just crop, or a 10-hour
circles, the
on
Serp
just
Mound.
crop circles. We could do a 10-hour podcast on Serpent Mound.
There's the paperback editions there.
Beautiful.
Great stuff. Jeff,
There you go,
thank
guys.
you
Thanks
so
for
much
having
for
me on. I
coming
know
in and blowing our
This
minds.
ran forever.
I think we're approaching
Jeez.
5 hours right now. Yeah.
Well, like I said, I stopped at the Portsmouth Earthworks, and we didn't talk about those, but and then there's like 100 other sites.
That's perfect.
So.
We'll leave some for next time.
Yeah. This has been great. My mind is blown. This has been...
That was a journey.
ultimately- Yeah.
was a journey.
We got a history lesson in not just earthworks, but, early lithography and all kinds of other ways
I
to
had to,
capture
I had to
this.
learn about all that.
That's
Yeah.
so cool.
It's wild.
Because and to understand why that made a difference in what we see.
Right.
It's totally has
Right.
to. It's a big, it's a huge part of the story. It
We
really,
take for
really
granted
is.
how easy we can
and
do
us
all this
being
stuff
photographers and videographers, it really, really was cool to learn about all that. So,
now. Yeah.
Jeff, you want to just let everybody know where we can connect with you?
Sure.
Where we
You
find
can order
you?
the book direct at Lulu. You could just do a search on ancient monuments and my name, and it'll come up. Or you can go to serpentmoundbooks.com, and there's a link that'll take you to order the book. You can go there either way. I have a couple of writings about the cover illustrations that you can see at serpentmoundbooks.com that kind of give, why I selected the certain images for the front covers of these books. So,
Sure. Cool.
I talk a little bit about the history of who made these illustrations and why I selected them for those book covers. So you may get a little benefit from, if you're interested in that stuff, you can go there and read about that. If you're interested in the Friends of Serpent Mound, you can go to serpentmound.org, find out about our events, our summer solstice program, or, you can go to the Perseid meteor shower event, or, so there'll be events that are listed there that you can participate in, and all that stuff is free to the public. So
Cool.
Yep. And if you guys are really, really interested in this stuff, join the Friends of the Serpent Mound Facebook group. It's awesome.
Pretty active. I talk about stories from the book in there, and we have discussions. I usually post a lot of news stories about mounds and earthworks and prehistoric stuff there, and there's a lot of interested people and a lot of people that just want to learn. And,
Yeah, for sure.
It really is a great community. You guys have, with Bev and your wife and everybody that's a part of Friends of the Serpent Mound, I mean, you guys really have done a great job of creating community.
Well, we really thank you guys for coming out and helping us at the summer solstice event and doing all that filming and the sound. And
yeah,
it's been
it really
fun.
helps us out.
You're very, very, very welcome. We had a blast doing it. But guys, I think
I have a couple of upcoming appearances and lectures. I've been asked to speak at the Frogman Conference.
You doing the Frogman
Hey,
Fest?
shout out to Jeff Craig,
Jeff Craig
Black.
has asked me to come this year and speak about the book. So I'll be doing that event in
Very cool.
Loveland in the spring. I think it's in March.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've also been invited to the Friends of the Plains Mounds in the same time frame in March. Cool. So watch for those dates. I'm sure I'll have more upcoming speaking engagements and other podcast stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we'll be out at Frogman Fest doing AV again this year. So we'll be out at Frogman Fest. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that, guys. And obviously we'll be, promoting everything that Jeff has coming up. And
when Jeff Craig called me up and he said, I want you to come and speak at the Frogman Fest, I go, my book isn't about Frogman. He goes, you don't have to speak about Frogman.
Yeah,
we got other people that do that.
Yeah.
There'll be enough people there talking about
But
Frogman.
I've known Jeff for a long time because he was a vendor at one of our early summer solstice events that the Friends group had at Serpent Mound. He minted Serpent Mound coins. So if you're a coin collector, you might want to check out and find one of Jeff Craig's minted Serpent Mound coins.
silver coins?
I don't know what they were made out of. I think I have one that he gave me, but he was selling them there. This is before he made his maps, like his Hidden Ohio map or his
Map in Black.
That's
Map in
really
Black,
cool.
yeah.
Crafty guy.
He is an interesting dude.
Yeah. So I've known him a little bit for a long time.
It gets to be a small world when you're talking about the strange in Ohio.
Yeah.
Jeff Craig and Jeff Wilson and a lot of people we meet have either met you or Thomas Johnson or Terry, or it's just
Yeah, 6 degrees of separation.
Yep.
Yeah, very quickly.
Yeah, Tom and Terry are great. They live about 4 miles from me, so.
Fantastic. Well, guys, we appreciate the hell out of all of you guys hanging with us tonight.
Check out his books.
Yes, please. Everybody go, check out Jeffery Wilson's new books. You know where to find them. All the links are in the description. Jeffrey, we thank you so
appreciate you
Thanks
coming
for
down.
inviting me. I appreciate
Absolutely.
you letting me
Yes.
come up and ramble on for a few hours.
Yeah, that was rad. We had a great time, and we know you did out there. Please like, subscribe, share. Keep the reviews coming. You guys know where to follow us. You know what to do. Much love and peace. We're out.
Later.
See you guys.
Well done. I'm thoroughly like overloaded with info.